For years, recycling worked for one simple reason. One country bought the world's scrap. Then it changed the rules. And suddenly, recyclable stopped meaning what people thought it meant. Because recycling isn't a moral system. It's a supply chain. Bin, truck, sorting, buyer. And when the buyer disappears, the whole thing reroutes. Some of it becomes new products. Some of it becomes disposal, just somewhere else. In this video, we're tracking 4 materials through the real system: plastic, clothes, electronics, and tires. Where they go, why they go there, and who actually uses them. This isn't a story about guilt or good intentions. It's a story about logistics, sorting, standards, and buyers. Because the bin is step 1, but what happens after the bin is where the outcome is decided. So, before we track the 4 materials, we need the part nobody sees: the rules of the trade. Recycling didn't start as a lifestyle. It started as scarcity. For most of human history, reuse was just normal: repairing, salvaging, stretching materials when supply was tight. Modern curbside recycling, though, grew for a different reason. Cities were running out of space, landfills were getting expensive, and governments needed a system that could scale. Early streams were relatively straightforward: paper, metal, glass, because they were easier to separate and had stable markets. Then packaging changed, plastics exploded, products became composites, and recycling quietly turned into something else. Not just a public service, but a commodity pipeline. Because once your recycling becomes a product, it follows the buyer. Recycling became a commodity trade, and trade can break. For years, a huge share of the world's exported scrap, especially plastic, flowed to one buyer: China. Not because it was charity, because it was cheap feedstock for manufacturing. Then China changed the spec. Policies like National Sword cracked down on imports and contamination. Translation: if your bales were messy, they weren't welcome. So recycling didn't stop, it rerouted. Here's the mechanism that explains the shockwave. Recycling is a commodity, and a commodity is only recyclable if the price is higher than the cost to meet the spec. When export demand collapsed, supply piled up at home. Prices dropped, and suddenly, the same blue bin went from "we get paid" to "we pay to move it." And decentralized doesn't mean local, it means distributed. Instead of one dominant buyer, scrap flowed to many smaller markets. That creates 3 outcomes fast: more volatility, more pressure on quality, and more leakage, material leaving the formal system. Some of that trade shifted to places that could take it. Turkey became a major destination for plastic scrap in the post-China period. But if a receiving system can't handle the volume, or enforcement is weak, economics can reward dumping and burning. So the system didn't become cleaner, it became more fragmented. Then came the second hit. China moved toward a full save on solid waste imports. And globally, the Basel Convention's plastic waste amendments took effect in 2021, tightening controls on mixed plastic shipments. Which means just ship it somewhere became harder. More consent, more friction, more cost. So from here on, the story is simple. Supply chains break at their weakest spec. And for recycling, that spec is sorting quality. There's one place that decides whether your recycling becomes a product or becomes trash: the sorting facility, often called a MRF. Screens split flat things from round things. Magnets pull steel. Eddy currents kick aluminum. Optical scanners spot plastics. And people do the last mile work, pulling out what doesn't belong. Because recycling isn't magic, it's quality control. Plastics are where recycling's reputation lives or dies, mostly because plastic isn't one thing. There are 2 stories. Story 1 is bottles, especially PET. Clean, separated, predictable. In the best case, it's a loop: bale, reprocessor, pellets, manufacturer. Story 2 is mixed plastics. Multiple resins, films, labels, weird shapes, multi-layer packaging. Harder to sort, lower value, more fragile. And what breaks the system fastest is contamination. Food, liquid, grease, and maybe items tossed in just to hope for the best. One wrong item doesn't just get recycled badly. It can drag down the whole batch until it's not worth processing at all. If you could follow a PET bottle from your city, the route often looks like this: collection, MRF, baled PET, reprocessor, pellets, factories. Sometimes the reprocessor is local, sometimes it's hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Because distance adds cost, and when cost goes up, tolerance goes down. Your recycling has passports. Therefore, distance changes the outcome. Recycled plastic scales when someone buys it consistently. When big buyers commit, reprocessors can invest. Capacity expands, quality improves, and the whole thing stops behaving like a fragile side project and starts behaving like a real supply chain. Now the one people don't expect: clothing. When you donate clothes, you picture local reuse. But the secondhand clothing economy is global. Bales get sorted, sold, and shipped. And fast fashion changed the math. More volume, lower durability, less resale value. So donation has three endings: rewear, downcycle, disposal. If the product was built cheap, the afterlife gets messy. Textile recycling exists, but it's constrained. A lot of what gets marketed as recycled textiles is actually plastic to fiber, because true fiber-to-fiber recycling is harder to scale. So yes, some recycled clothing is real, but often it's still the plastic system, wearing a textile label. Electronics are the opposite of plastic: messy but valuable. Inside e-waste, there's copper, aluminum, gold, and other critical materials. But formal collection and recycling is still low, and that creates two systems at once: a safe, regulated pathway and unsafe shortcuts. This is where recycling becomes supply strategy. When manufacturers commit to recovered materials, recycling becomes less dependent on spot markets. It turns into planning, contracts, capacity, consistency. That's the difference between recycling as a slogan and recycling as infrastructure. Tires are built to survive heat, friction, UV, and impacts, which means they're complex mixes of rubber, steel, textiles, and additives. So tire recycling usually means three outcomes. 1. Shred into crumb rubber. 2. Energy recovery. 3. Pyrolysis, breaking tires into outputs like oil and recovered carbon materials. This is what circular looks like in tires. Not a perfect loop, a supply chain for outputs that industry actually buys. Recycling isn't one system. It's 4 different industries sharing one symbol, and each one breaks at a different bottleneck. Plastics break when streams are mixed, dirty, and expensive to sort, so the economics push it toward disposal. Clothes break when quality drops below resale value, so donation becomes a global shuffle with a waste tail. Electronics break when collection is informal, because value attracts extraction, but safety and compliance cost money. Tires break when there isn't stable demand for the outputs, because the loop only closes if industry buys what comes out the other side. So yes, recycling is still good. It reduces landfill, it reduces virgin extraction, and when it's done right, it works. But it only scales when 3 things line up: design, infrastructure, and demand. When design simplifies materials, processing gets cheaper. When infrastructure improves sorting, quality goes up. And when demand is real, when buyers commit, loops actually close. That's what circular means, not a bin, a supply chain built to loop. So keep recycling. Just don't treat the bin like the solution. Treat it like step 1.